Welcome to eSideConnect.com, bringing health education to you, the public. Last week we actually talked about BioPsychosocial and how the biology, the physical health, affects our mental health, and then how mental health can have an impact on our relationship health, and then relationship can impact our mental health, and then mental health affecting physical health, and how we can actually get caught up in this vicious cycle. And so today we're going to zoom into relationships and actually talk about some tips around relationship work. So my name is Dr. Vin, and I am a family doctor in Brisbane, Queensland. So let's talk about relationships. In relationships, I often talk about three domains in relationships, and most of the time we are not very good in these three domains. So let's talk about the first one. The first one is actually probably one of the most important, at the same time actually the simplest one out of all the three. So first one is when we have conflict, it's really important that we align our goals. Because if you have two or more different people with different goals, we're going to have a war. If you have two or more different people with the same goal, we're going to make a great team. So the first rule here is when we are in conflict, when we have a conflict with someone, maybe the first thing we should say is, I'm curious, what is your goal? And then listen to understand so that we can see that, hey, maybe our goals are different, so that we have a chance to at least align them. And once you can align those goals, maybe your conflict will resolve. So then the second domain. The second domain is also quite simple, but not easy to practice. So my rule here is this: to connect when we are disconnected. When we feel a little bit disconnected from another party or someone that we love or the people that we work with, when we feel a bit disconnected from them, we feel as if they don't care about us anymore and they're not considerate of us anymore and they're disconnecting from us, the rational thing to do is to try and reconnect. But most of us actually don't do that, because as human beings, when we feel a bit disconnected from our tribe, from the other person, we get stressed. And when we get stressed, we either fight, we lash out, we criticize, or we actually withdraw and we flight. So that's just a simple fight or flight response, and we all do that. It's actually a very human thing to do. Having said that, when we are feeling disconnected and we fight or we flight, it actually, most of the time, that probably can increase the disconnection. So then we actually need to learn how to reconnect. So there's a gentleman in the States, his name is Gary Chapman, who does a lot of marriage counseling or couple counseling, and he describes 5 love languages. And sometimes I don't call it love languages, I call it the currency of connection, or the measuring stick for connections, or just values and beliefs around connection, because we all have our biases. But culturally, I think we connect in 5 different ways, and most of us can relate to this. So let's go through those 5 ways of connection. One of the easiest way to think about this is, for those of you out there who have a partner, think of the time when you first went out with each other. How did you show care? And chances are you probably did these 5 things. You actually spend time with each other. You probably bring them up and say, hey, let's go and see a movie. Let's go to the park. Let's go for a walk. So that is about spending time and being present with one another. Number 2, you'll probably say very nice things to each other. So that's words of acknowledgement, words of affirmation. You give each other's little praises, for example, like, hey, that's a nice dress, or you look so beautiful today, or you are very nice to me, or thanks for helping me out. So that's words of acknowledgement. The third way to show care and connection is giving each other's gifts, for example, on Valentine's Day or on birthdays. And number 4 is showing physical affection, and not everyone is very physical. Some people in some culture, for example, the Italians, for example, are actually quite more physical than some other cultures. So it could be a handshake, could be a hug, could be a pat on the back. So these are physical ways of showing love and care and affection. And number 5 is, particularly if you're more pragmatic, more practical, you show care, love and connection through doing things for one another. So that's service. So if you think back in those times when you first sort of went out with each other, for those who are together with someone at the moment, you probably, chances are you probably did all these 5 things. And as life goes on and you have children, things that get a bit more stressful, work gets in the way, you'll find that these 5 things that you have done in the past will get less and less, and then you have more and more disconnection. So I think the first thing is to be more aware of that and learning how to reconnect through those 5 things. Now, even though we culturally do all those 5 things, we certainly have a bias towards 1 or 2 or even 3 of these things. Just like right hand, left hand, we have a bias for those who's right-handed have a bias towards using their right hand, and those who are left using a left hand. So for those of you out there who are a little bit biased towards service, for example, you may show care through working hard, through providing, protecting, working 2 or 3 jobs to support the family, where some of you may not see that as an important way of showing connection, but spending time with each other is actually more important. So you see here, when you have a relationship between, say for example, one person and another, and one person is showing care through service, through doing things for the other person, and the other person's time, you may actually have a mismatch. And when you have a mismatch like this, there's a miscommunication. So one person is thinking, you love your job more than me, you hardly spend time with me, you actually don't care about me. Whereas the other person may respond with a bit of defensiveness maybe, and say, what are you talking about? I do this for you, I go to work for you, I support you, I do this for the family. And likewise, as a family doctor, when we do a lot of parenting work, sometimes we see this in kids as well. For example, a teenager who may feel very disconnected from his or her family. And what's happening here is that, say for example, the child is very words orientated and needs words of affirmation, words of acknowledgement, but all they're getting is criticism. But from the parent's point of view, they're not criticizing for the sake of criticizing, they're actually trying to help and support their children in learning new skills in order to survive and thrive in this world. So they're showing care and love and connection through service, whereas the child's interpreting that as, hey, you don't care about me. So you can see there's a lot of these miscommunication in the emotional language. You know, even though we're speaking in the same language like English or Vietnamese or Chinese or whatever it may be, we're actually not talking in the same emotional language or feeling language. So that is really important, and maybe down the track we'll probably need to talk a little bit more about this in depth. But for today, just to give you a little bit more of a broad idea around relational skills, I think that is probably maybe just enough for you to understand the importance of that. Alright, so domain number 3 is to resolve your conflict without fighting or flighting. So most of us resolve our conflict through a fight response, getting angry, getting frustrated, blaming, criticizing, lashing out through aggression perhaps, or sometimes we are doing the opposite, which is running away, stonewalling, don't want to talk about it anymore, avoiding it. Most of us can relate to that because it's actually quite a human thing. You know, I'm certainly doing that probably on most days. Having said that, once you're more aware of that and more aware of what you're doing, that fight or flight response, and the fact that it's not really helping, we can make changes to that. We can become more aware, more self-aware, and more able to detach or distance from that, and then shift gears to a more healthier way, which is more about accepting and acknowledging the situation and able to then move forward. And how does that actually look like? Say for example, if someone's having conflict with myself, ideally, how I would respond is to first acknowledge the other person's position. For example, if someone's upset with me, I think the first thing to do is to acknowledge that. Hey, John, I can see that you're actually quite upset with me, and I can see that your point of view is probably going to be different to mine, and can you tell me more so that I can understand? So you see here we can acknowledge the other person's position. We can authentically accept that it's different to ours and we don't necessarily agree with it, but we can still acknowledge that. And then we say, and at the same time, this is where I'm coming from, and how do you think we can move forward? So that's about accepting, acknowledging, and then being assertive, knowing what we want, which is very collaborative, and being able to assert ourselves and knowing what values and principles of what we want, and then moving forward with that without any blame, without any anger, and that is being more assertive. So the difference between being assertive and aggressive is often a very difficult one for most people to be aware of. And I think the difference between being aggressive and assertive is in how you feel. I think when you are being assertive with a lot of blame behind that, a lot of frustration and blame, then it actually will come across as being aggressive. Whereas if you say it in a very more detached way and acknowledging the other person's point of view, and at the same time acknowledging your point of view as well, then you can actually move forward in a collaborative way. So that's actually being quite assertive. Hopefully I've highlighted these 3 domains for you in relationships, and you can see why most people struggle in relationships, because most people find these 3 domains actually quite difficult, and some may not be aware at all. So hopefully today I've raised an awareness around relationships. So my tips for today: number 1, when you're in conflict, always think about, hey, and ask yourself and ask the other person, I'm curious, what are your goals? And listen to understand, so that you can try and understand their perspective, so that you can actually acknowledge them. And acknowledgement doesn't mean you have to agree with them. You just want to acknowledge that's their position. And normally, ideally, when you can acknowledge the other person, that the other person feel that you've listened to them, you actually will have a better chance of them then listening to you and understanding where your perspective is coming in. And 2 different perspectives can coexist, as long as we appreciate and acknowledge each other. And then once that's being acknowledged, then you can actually move forward. Okay, so then number 2. Number 2 is to make sure that when we feel a bit disconnected, to accept that our instinct tells us to fight or we flight. And being aware of that is important, and then try to reconnect when we're disconnected through the right connection currencies. And number 3 is to resolve your conflict through being more acknowledging and assertive, rather than avoiding or through aggression or blame. Alright, so hopefully that has been very helpful. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel. And if you have any questions, please put in the comments below. I always try my best to read them on a regular basis and respond to them. And if you want me to cover any particular topics in the future, again, don't be shy. Please leave it in the comments. So thank you for joining me again. I really appreciate that you have joined us through this YouTube. And until next time, I'll see you then. Bye for now.